Hi, I'm Mary. Welcome to the IHC Craft Room. In today's video, I'm going to show you how I made these two winter-themed candles. I'll show you all the steps and all the materials so that you can make some candles just like these ones at home. So grab all your stuff and let's get crafty.
This is Mary. Welcome to the IHC Craft Room. For materials, we'll begin with Millennium Soy Wax, two 8-ounce Elegance candle tins. Aren't they pretty? The Village Crafting Candle Winter Fragrance Explore Kit, some Wick Stickums, two HTP1312 Wicks, and some blue liquid candle dye. For tools, we'll begin with some parchment paper, paper towels, a saucepan as a double boiler, a small pour pot, a glass measuring cup, two plastic shot glasses, a kitchen scale, a pot holder, a heat gun, a temperature gun, some wood stir sticks, wick centering tools, some toothpicks, a wick trimming tool, a few silicone snowflake molds, and some rubber gloves. Well, before we can get to candle making, we need a plan. Just how much wax should I be measuring out? That means it's time for candle maker math. These 8-ounce candle tins typically have a recommended wax fill of 7 ounces, but since I'll be adding snowflake decorations on top, I'll need more. My target is 9 ounces of combined wax and fragrance for each candle. I'm aiming for a 10% fragrance load as usual, which means I'll need 26 mils of fragrance oil per candle. In total, I'll use 480 grams of melted wax and 52 mils of fragrance oil divided between the two candles and the snowflake molds. So let's go ahead and measure out 480 grams of wax and set that in our double boiler to melt before we move on to prepping our fragrance oil. The Village Crafting Candle Winter Fragrance Explore Kit has a total of 10 winter-themed fragrances. I decided to choose which fragrance to make in the most superficial way possible. I chose solely based on the fragrance's name. Oh my god, I'm so superficial. So today we will be making a candle with Winterscape fragrance oil and Alpine Getaway. I mean, they just scream winter, don't they? I'm going to pin a comment below with my opinion on each of these 10 fragrances in case you're interested in what my nose has to say about them. Let's go ahead and get started measuring out our fragrance oil. I'm going to protect my scale and table with some parchment paper and paper towels, and then we'll go ahead and measure out as close to 26 grams of fragrance oil as possible for each, before I set them aside until later. With our wax melting beautifully and the fragrance oil ready to go, it's time to get our candle tins prepped. First, I'll give each tin a quick wipe to make sure they're spotless and free of any dust or debris. I'll also clean the base of each wick. Nothing's gonna mess with that bond between the wick stickum and the wick base. Nuh-uh. Next, I'll peel the backing off of each wick stickum and attach it to the bottom of the wick. Then I'll eyeball the center of each candle tin and stick the wick down firmly, first in one tin and then the other. From there, I'll use my trusty wood stir stick to press them in nice and secure. Let's make sure these wicks stay exactly where they're supposed to. Know your place, wicks. Know your place. Now that we have our candle tins all set, let's skip ahead to when we have the silicone molds ready too and our wax fully melted. Using my scale, I'll split this wax into 240 grams of melted wax per container and get ready to pour in our fragrance oil. Excellent. First, we'll mix in Alpine Getaway into our small pour pot on the left. And then I'll mix in Winterscape into the glass measuring cup on the right. I'm going to go ahead and give them both a really good mix, stirring really well. We want to make sure that the fragrance oil bonds really well to the melted wax. Millennium Soy Wax is supposed to be poured at 115 degrees, which is what I'll target for the actual candles, but I'm going to pour the wax at a higher temperature into the snowflake molds. Why? Because I'm impatient, that's why. Now, in terms of color, I'm planning to make the Winterscape candle blue with white snowflakes on top. And vice versa for the Alpine Getaway candle, white with blue snowflakes instead. So I'm going to need to pour my white Winterscape snowflakes before adding in the blue candle dye. I'd like it to be a super faint blue color, so I'm going to use the toothpick technique I've used in the past, where I slide a toothpick along the dropper to grab some dye, and then swirl the toothpick into the melted wax to get a small amount of blue candle dye in the mix. Muy bueno. That looks perfect. Now we just have to wait until the wax cools down to around 115 degrees before we get ready to pour the rest of our candle. Let's skip ahead to when the wax has cooled down to about 115 degrees, and we'll go ahead and pour these candles. I'm going to start with Alpine Getaway since we still need to pour the blue snowflakes for that one. I'm going to pour the wax into the candle tin and then leave a nice gap to the top so that I have room for the snowflakes and the tin's lid too. Now let's add in some blue candle dye using the same toothpick method as before, and I'll pour the rest into the silicone molds. It's become very clear that I definitely overestimated the amount of wax and fragrance I would need for these candles, which is a-okay with me because that just means I'll have some Winterscape and Alpine Getaway scented melts too. Now let's go ahead and pour the Winterscape candle, making sure to leave a nice gap at the top for the snowflakes and candle tin lid. I'm going to grab another winter themed silicone mold so I can turn this leftover Winterscape scented wax into some wax melts. Awesome. We've got one last step before we leave these candles to cure for a bit. Let's get those wick centering tools in place and make sure our wicks are nice and straight before we leave them to cure overnight. Usually at this point, I'd be removing the wick centering tools and assessing the actual candles, but I was way too excited to see how the snowflakes came out, so I started demolding those first. Overall, considering I used Millennium Soy Wax for these molds instead of Pillar Soy Wax, the snowflakes came out pretty good. I definitely broke some tips off of them and I cracked some into pieces, but overall, I can't really complain. Next time I make candles with shapes on top, I'll try to get Mary from the future to be a little less lazy and use Pillar Soy Wax for the silicone molds instead. We'll see. Okay, now let's remove those wick centering tools and have a look at our candle tops. I'm going to trim the wicks down a bit, but I'll leave them a bit on the high side because we are going to be adding those snowflakes on top. The light blue Winterscape scented candle turned out better than expected. There was really only some minor frosting and otherwise everything was great. It had a smooth top and the wax adhered very well to the vessel walls. The white Alpine Getaway scented candle looks even better, of course, since there's no additional color added to make frosting a thing at all. Same results for this candle, a super smooth top and great adhesion to the vessel walls. So all in all, this was a very successful pour. After some messing around, I decided which snowflakes would be added to each candle, and then using my heat gun, I started to gently melt a thin layer of wax across the top of my candle. I'll gently drop some of the small light blue snowflakes into that thin layer of melted wax so that when the wax solidifies, it'll lock my snowflakes in place. For the light blue Winterscape scented candle, I'm going to try something I've never done before. I have this long metal shish kebab skewer and I'm going to use my heat gun to warm it up quite a bit. I'm really hoping that I can use that to poke a hole in the center of this big white snowflake without cracking it because it's the only big white snowflake I have. Oh boy, was I pleased when this worked. You have no idea. Okay, I'm gonna melt a layer of wax across the top of this candle too, and then thread the snowflake onto the wick. And boom, both of these winter themed candles are ready to party. So you know what that means, right? It's time to light these babies up. Right when I lit the Winterscape scented candle, I realized I'd left the wick unnecessarily long, so I blew it out and trimmed the wick down before relighting it. The candle started to burn very nicely right from the start. At the 25-minute mark, we have a decent melt pool happening on each candle and some pretty happy flames too. At the 1 hour mark, we have a really nice large melt pool and some lovely large but calm flames on both candles. And at the 2.5 hour mark, we have a full melt pool for the blue Winterscape scented candle and a nearly full melt pool for the white Alpine Getaway scented candle. Both of these candles burned beautifully.
So what do you think? Overall, this was a very successful experiment. However, also not very successful. I definitely got flames, I got full melt pools, and that's awesome. But I didn't get a lot of scent throw, and that's not awesome. That's definitely something that I would need to experiment on. What's causing that? Do I need to change my recipe a little bit? Is my fragrance oil something that I need to increase or decrease? Is the wax the issue? Is it the wick? I don't know. I'd have to test and try different variations until I got the level of scent throw that I was looking for. Or in the end, I could determine that it's actually the fragrance oils and they don't have a strong scent throw, and maybe this isn't the right oil for me. It's not necessarily going to produce the final product that I'm looking for. That's part of the candle making experiment experience. Like, if I was trying to perfect these candles, I would continue to try all of these little things to get to the point where I'm like, all right, now these candles are bomb. Man, I just aged myself by saying bomb, right? I don't want to talk about it. Anyway, if you're interested in learning a little bit more about candle making, check out one of these videos. And don't forget to subscribe so that we can continue to get crafty together. Toodaloo!